Mama,
Hello and welcome to Chats, a television podcast, Season 8B, RootsChatz. My name is Alan, and I'm joined as always by Magellan.
Hey, what's up?
I'm doing well. I mentioned to you before that I haven't been drinking coffee on the weekends because I'm not working on the weekends, and I'm tired all the time. So this is fake and performative. Woo! Let's get it. How is this Sunday treating you, Magellan? I know it's the weather's been kind of wacky lately, and it's hard to pin down what you want to do outside, if anything.
The weather is not the thing that's keeping me inside.
It's not what? Was there anything else? No.
I just felt like it. The day's been fine. Sort of, I don't know. Roots takes a long time to watch, and sometimes you gotta take breaks and lie down. So that's pretty much all I've done today. Is that?
Yeah, it's nice to kind of like it's like a weekend course or something, or like a stay away camp where it's like I'm just at Roots camp for now. I don't do anything else.
Right. Yeah, I was gonna go to the grocery store, but I haven't quite done that yet. So
what were you gonna get from the grocery store? What's your shopping list?
groceries.
Get the kids with it. Oh,
Bread.
okay.
Some spinach.
Okay, honey.
And that's it. Just bread and spinach.
That's it. That's all you need. Brunch.
No, I'm just kidding. Salad, salad fixins, bread,
Spinach.
spinach.
Murder you. Come on.
Maybe a sandwich.
One sandwich.
Yeah, you ever do that? You go to the grocery store, but then you reward yourself
For going to the
getting
grocery store.
Well, but with getting something that you don't have to prepare when you get home.
Totally.
So that's probably what I'll do.
Sometimes I'll just buy a whole tub of icing and eat it before in the parking lot and film it.
Icing?
Yes.
Like cake icing?
Yes.
Okay.
I
That's
haven't
great.
actually explicitly done that. What I did do once is I was making a cake and I bought sugar-free icing, and a friend was like, what does that even taste like? Isn't that terrible? And so I filmed myself in my car at the grocery store, like putting a finger through some sugar-free icing, and it was fine. Like it definitely tastes like icing, but there's something just missing, and the answer is sugar. But yeah, that's what's going on in the world. I'm trying to get some sort of exercise in. We got a treadmill yesterday, so
wow.
Now there's no more excuse for me to be a lazy fart, other than I'm tired all the time.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, something I'm not tired of talking about is Roots: The Next Generations, Magellan.
Sure.
This week, we watched 2 more episodes of the 1978 miniseries Roots TNGs, which were TNG's Part 5, as well as TNG's Part 6. Part 5 was written for TV by Ernest Kinoy. The teleplay was by Thad Mumford and Dan Wilcox, and it was directed by Roots Next Generations alum George Stanford Brown. Shout-outs. There were parts of this episode that I felt were really strikingly well directed, so good on him. And this episode aired originally February 22nd, 1979. Magellan, can you tell me what happened in Roots: The Next Generations Part 5, please?
It's now 1932, and these are hard times during the Depression. A young Alex Haley is living with his parents Bertha and Simon and his grandparents. Simon is frustrated working at the lumber yard, but with a master's degree in agriculture, dreams of breaking free and teaching. I guess he dreams of breaking free and teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Will has little interest in modernizing the operation, but good news for Simon comes with a job offer as a college professor at Alabama A&M. He's embarrassed at the things that the school's president, Dr. Horace Hughley, has to do to please possible donors. In addition to his teaching duties, Simon tries to meet black farmers in the country to help improve their crop yield. Simon finds it difficult to help them as most don't own the land they farm. He meets Lyle Pettyjohn, the county agricultural agent, who is supportive of Simon's scientific approach to improving farming methods, but also realizes the challenges both of them face in having to deal with the landowners. Pettyjohn pays the price for supporting Simon's ideas. As for Alex, he learns of his family history from his grandpa Will, and traveling with his father, he sees firsthand the poverty in which black sharecroppers and farmhands live and work.
Wow. There's a lot going on in that one.
Yeah, that's pretty much the episode. What'd you think of this one?
I really like. I've kind of like fallen in love with Simon Haley as a character, as a mouthpiece for early 20th century. I guess like talk about the Great Depression, talk about agriculture, and even the evolution of agriculture in America. How that industry is slowly starting to transform around the government, and how different farmers want to be able to just make produce the crops that they want and earn a living wage. I think we're really far away now from like I work at a farm for another man and he gets all the money and I get all the suffering. But at the same time, as we see in the struggle of this episode, not everybody likes that, and it's cool to see Simon not only like successfully becoming a professor, but using his agricultural studies to help the everyman. I think is really great. Even though it gives this episode, the story, it kind of like gets into some sort of weird super heroics for him, where he's like, "I'm the one who shall save the farmers," but at the end of the day, a lot of Roots is about people fighting for what's right, so it works, I think, much more than it doesn't in this one.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still enjoy Simon? I feel like in the pantheon of like the males in this family tree, he's at least for me, he's higher up. I don't know if he's like at the tippy top. No, very few people can top Tom, and obviously Kunta Kinte, but he's cool.
Yeah, I like Simon Haley a lot. I think he's one of my favorite characters across Roots. I think part of it is maybe that I sort of like, the like college educated academic archetype of a character, and like seeing someone who's trying to change the world through learning and through doing things a smarter way. It just always appeals to me. So I think that's part of the reason that I like Simon Haley. But I thought that across the episodes that he's in, we see a pretty nuanced portrayal of him, because we're introduced to him as like, this big dork who's got a hole in his pants. And I mean, we see him mature quite a lot and deal with this difficult situation where he puts himself at risk for the sake of trying to create systematic improvement in the system of sharecropping, which is, the deck is stacked against African American people. And it's cool to see him trying to use the gifts he has and the things that he's been able to achieve to make things better for everybody.
Totally. Yeah. I think this episode does a good job of also splitting the time of the episode well between Simon, Alex Haley a little bit, and even still like touching on Will Palmer now in his very old age in 1932, which is where we start the episode. And he's gotten a little chubby, and he's playing. I think he's playing checkers with Alex at one point early on, and he drops some pieces and then tries to pick them up and can't. And then right away, Alex is like, "Grandpa, are you gonna die?" And it's like, "Oh, jeez, this is what I'm getting myself into for this episode. Here we go."
Yeah, there's a lot of kind of corny stuff like that. I mean, the episode starts with Alex Haley being like, "Why are those people going to work?" And Grandpa's like, "Well, the depression's happening right now." just so you know.
Talking about like the show touching on history, like the bullet points. It's just like, now it's time for the depression.
Yeah. But out of that scene where Alex Haley's like, "Grandpa, are you going to die?" He's like, "Yeah, probably. So let me give you your birthday present early."
Yeah.
And it's actually a really cool gift. He brings Alex into the garage or whatever, and there's this huge slice of it must have been like a sequoia or something. He says it's a tree from California, and he's marked on the rings different milestones in both American history and in the history of their family tree. And I just thought that was like a really cool visual and a cool idea. And he says to Alex, "See, what seems like a long time for us is nothing but a tiny span in the life of a tree. And that same tree is nothing but a tiny span in the mind of God." So you can kind of see how like his family is instilling in Alex Haley this deep reverence for and sense of legacy and family and generations before him. And that kind of causes him problems in the next episode where he feels a lot of pressure when it comes to that. But right now he's sort of in awe of it. And I just thought it was a really sweet scene.
Yeah, and the story of Alex as like the struggle of a child of like many generations of extremely hard workers and him struggling to define where he himself fits into that is actually really resonant. And it's important to show that part of history because, you know, everybody up until this point has been like, well, I've worked hard and the system has fought against me, but at the end of the day, I stood for what I believed in, and that's what matters. And like Alex Haley is growing up in a period of time where it's kind of not the same exact. The fight looks very different than it used to. And so when everybody's telling him, like, you're going to grow up someday and everyone else did all this stuff, of course that's going to put a lot of stress on him. And we'll talk about that stress more in part 6. But I just see, like, I guess a bit of myself and a bit of, like, so many children of many generations of immigrants eventually who are like, hey, what are you going to contribute to the legacy next? And it's like, fuck if I know. Like, I'm just trying to exist. And he's born in 1921. So he's like, imagine being born in the Great Depression, and then your dad is telling you, like, why aren't you rich yet? Like, why aren't you financially successful and stable yet? What are you doing? And it's like, well, thanks. But yeah, I liked his stuff a lot, and it was sad to see Will Palmer getting old, even though we have had problems with that portrayal occasionally. I think the best example of like nostalgia for that legacy, though, was a brief shot after this tree scene to the fading W.E. Palmer Lumber Company sign, and it's like, oof, I watched that get put up. Like, oh boy, here we go. Yeah, the clock is ticking faster and faster. And it's also that, like, Simon, you know, other things that are kind of relatable. Like, Simon can't move away right now because he can't get a good job. He's not getting his professor job. He's struggling a lot. He's been requesting for a while. He hates that he's waiting on their dime. The guy's pissed. And finally some good news comes. Bertha George comes and gives him a letter that says he got the job of professor of agriculture. And I was very excited. I was like, oh my God, yay, this is so great. And they move to Alabama. They leave Will Palmer behind, and he's very sad. And he thought that his son was going to work with him in the lumber mill for a little while longer, but you know, you got to pull up roots at some point. Yeah. And we're talking about college funding at the new university. Which university is it that he works at again?
It's Alabama A&M.
Alabama A&M. Okay. This part, I saw your notes. You found very interesting because as you I feel like have more thoughts on the institution of college, but also like the idea of college funding and sort of the struggle that in this case both Simon and his dean are dealing with, trying to get funding for their department and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of these episodes, to really kind of the story of Roots: The Next Generations overall, is this story of like where, you know, like legal liberty is one thing, but where in these institutions are African American people going to find, like, you know, respect, and like white people leaving them alone, you know, and sort of treating them as actual equals. And we see different characters in the family trying to find that in different ways. And Simon has made a pretty clear choice for himself. He's like, I'm an academic. I'm going to be a professor. That is going to have all of the trappings of sort of like respectability and dignity. And I'm part of the talented 10th. And like, I'm going to change the world. And it's great. And then you get to this scene where he's talking to, I guess it's like the dean or somebody higher up at the university where he joins it. And this scene is I think this is one of the most masterful scenes of the whole series.
It's pretty subtle, actually, in the directing, at least.
It's a really slow burn where you're like, something's up here. And then all of a sudden it reaches this climax that is just heart-wrenching and surreal. And like, I haven't seen Get Out, but like from what I know about the sort of tone of that movie and things that happen, this feels like a very modern, kind of thing that could come out of a movie like that. Mm-hmm. What ends up happening in this scene. Because what happens is the dean is sort of like, Simon, you've got a lot of big ideas, but let's slow down. Listen, we have somebody who's coming here who's like from a philanthropic group from the north and is going to be giving the university some money because like the state of Alabama doesn't give us that much money. And from that moment, you see on Simon Haley's face this look of concern. And I think that that Harewood, what's the guy's first name? Dorian Harewood, who's playing Simon Haley, does such an excellent job of telling us the story of this scene and telling us how he's feeling every step of the way. Like hiding it from all the other characters in the scene, but communicating very clearly to us that he is upset by what's going on. And there's just something subtle about the cinematography here too, like the shots that are chosen and the way that it lingers on certain things. We have this white woman come into the office and, she's talking about like, oh, the school's great. Oh, I wish the choir could sing for us. And then she's like, oh, I love those Negro spirituals. Could you sing us one? And the dean guy is frozen in a smile, and you're like close up on him as he makes the decision of like, okay, I guess I will. And then he starts singing, and I it's like melting in my seat. Like, oh my God. This is incredible. There's just such density to the scene because he's singing a song that was like composed and passed down by African American people during the time of slavery as something that, they would sing in the midst of forced labor, as an act of community building and defiance. And now this guy is singing it to sort of placate this white woman who's like, boy, I love the sound of those songs. And that dynamic is abundantly clear to Simon Haley, who's just standing there like, wow, I can't escape the power structures of slavery. Even here in this university, this place that I've sort of lauded as like the source of my liberation and power, even here, this white lady can come in and be like, but sing us a tune, won't you? And then this guy does it. And she walks out of
without hesitation, might I add.
Right. She walks out of the room and she says, the power of that voice. And the amazing thing is they all have it, which is like, okay, that's gross. And then the dean turns to Simon Haley. He doesn't comment on it. He doesn't say anything like, we got to do that. You understand, don't you? Almost without acknowledging it at all, he says to Simon, like, I hope I did a good job. My wife tells me that when I sing a cappella, I tend to stray from the key. And that's it. That's the end of the scene.
Yeah, moving on.
It's fucking chilling. I mean, it's such a good scene.
And it works too. I think both of these episodes like put a lot more direct first-person focus on the main character themselves and don't take so much of a backseat to it because, like you were saying, this scene has that sense of dread even before he starts singing because you're getting it from Simon's perspective where he's already worried about like, I'm at this new job. Am I going to do well? Am I going to make the change that I want to see? And then just watching it all like unravel in front of him. And he's like, like exactly like you said, there's no escaping this. There's no,
right. And it's sort of part of to what you were saying before about some things I had in my notes here. Like, I love, universities and colleges. I think that they're great places. I had a great experience when I was an undergrad. I'd like to go to graduate school someday. The idea of being an academic appeals to me. But, we have to acknowledge that, like, to a certain extent, higher education is like, it has some grift qualities to it. And it, from the very beginning of its existence, it's been a way in which the super rich can like launder their wealth. I mean, you look at like the names of some of the great universities, and it's like Leland Stanford was a railroad tycoon who exploited workers. Duke was a factory owner in the South. Vanderbilt is another railroad tycoon, right? Like you can find a lot of those names. And so Simon Haley knows that like, and it's something that's true of universities today, that there are masters here, for lack of a better word. And it feels like a place where that shouldn't be the case, but it is, because money talks here, and money pulls the strings just as much as it does anywhere else.
Harvard College named after John Harvard, who is a slave owner also. Like just
right,
straight
right.
up.
Yeah, right.
These are the big places. Yeah. The history of American like universities is extremely fraught, and it's not only like that they were founded by those people, but like even today the private funding that helps like certain universities is not tracked very well, and it's not as like morally righteous as it's made out to be, of like, oh, you helped support this university. We joke a lot as alumni about like how colleges will like harass their students for like money and stuff, but in a lot of ways I would rather they get their money from me if I'm successful enough to then pay them back than like billionaires who have never attended and are simply doing it, like you said, for a sort of laundering of their funds.
Right. Well, and when I was at school, just as an example, there was a student movement to ask the university to divest from fossil fuel companies. And the administration pushed back against that or ignored that. And there was also protest to have it divest from organizations that were anti-Palestinian. And it's just it's a whole thing. So
did that end up working out for them?
No. I mean, I think the university ended up doing some fossil fuel divestment years later for another reason, and then sort of was like claiming that they were doing it for the right reason, so
it's often how it goes, though.
Yeah.
But so the show does pivot again from the college stuff to being a story about the Great Depression and helping out these poor farmers. Do you have in your pocket sort of a 101 on the Great Depression, how we ended up here?
So I feel like most people who know American history know that this is one of those like tentpole moments that a lot of people are familiar with. The United States was in an economic depression called the Great Depression from 1929 to really when it got involved in World War II in the 1930s, in 1941, excuse me. I don't know. The Depression I think it's one of those things where it's got fishy start and end dates. So, but anyway, there are a number of, I think, causes that you can ascribe to like why the Depression happens. But as with most economic crashes, it has to do with there being bubbles and people over speculating in particular arenas, and then that sort of falling out. And a lot of that had to do with the stock market and people sort of overvaluing businesses greater than they were worth, and stock speculation getting out of control. Some of that had to do with a new phenomenon in the 1920s of people buying on credit. And so people are spending money that they don't have. They're borrowing money that they can't pay back. It's putting pressure on banks. It's causing industries to overproduce for a demand that maybe doesn't actually exist or that's artificial. And all that stuff just combines ultimately to cause the bottom to fall out of the economy. And I'm not an economist, so that description might not have been perfect, but I think you can, find further information there. But people usually say that like the stock market crash of 1929 is when the Depression started, which is not entirely accurate. It's a much more complex and nuanced thing than that. It wasn't as if like, the switch was flipped and
it was perfect and then it was ruined.
Right. One day we're doing great and the next day everybody's, doing the Charleston straight out the window or whatever. It's not quite like that. But so then we're in the Depression, and the president at the time is an alum of my alma mater, Stanford alum. The only president to have graduated from Stanford is one of the worst ones. So
oops,
we take pride in that. Herbert Hoover, who there's actually an institute at Stanford named after him. That's like a secretive conservative think tank, which sucks. So it's a lot of fun, bad stuff there. But yeah, Herbert Hoover, his approach to the Depression, there's, some things that he tries to do to help, but overall his attitude is this sort of like rugged individualism. People pick themselves up by their bootstraps. Like, let's leave it to corporations and private individuals to donate their money and to take care of one another. And it's not the place of the government to get involved. And that becomes a solution that people are not so crazy about as the Depression continues to worsen, and Hoover becomes pretty unpopular. So in 1932, there's this fresh-faced young man named Franklin Roosevelt, who I don't know how fresh-faced he was, but I think he was maybe 40-something at the time. But he runs for president, and he's one of the better-known presidents in U.S. history. And FDR's platform is really, it's progressive with a capital P in nature, like the progressive era. So he sort of advocates for a government that's run by people with expertise, a government that is about experimenting with solutions and trying things, getting involved in the economy, intervening with what's going on, to try to see if there's something that can be done, as opposed to a government that's laissez-faire and choosing to sit out of those things. Mm-hmm. And so what ends up coming out of that is a set of policies called the New Deal. So when Roosevelt gets into office, within the first 100 days of his presidency, he and his allies pass through Congress a series of programs that are meant to alleviate the Great Depression in different ways. And Roosevelt's administration is very hotly contested historiographically because it's so close to the present day, and I think also so close to modern debates about politics that it's within everybody's best interest to like interpret Roosevelt in whatever way serves their purposes best. So I can't really give you like hard and fast historical analyses that you couldn't find like a million refutations against, but suffice to say, the way that I believe and understand it is that the New Deal didn't end the Great Depression, but my opinion is that it certainly kept the Depression from getting worse. It established many important precedents that have headed off a similarly bad Depression from happening since that point. And overall, I think that the whole FDR approach is a good one. But yeah, so that's that. And a number of reforms end up taking place, but we can talk about the one that's highlighted in this episode, which is the creation of the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, or the AAA. And the idea behind the AAA was essentially, as is talked about in this episode, farmers are suffering in the Depression. So what we can do, because people are not buying their crops, is the federal government can pay farmers subsidies to, in some cases, actually just destroy some of their crop yields because they were drastically overproducing thanks to modern agricultural technologies. they're drastically overproducing. So to help farmers stay solvent, the federal government will cut them all a check, which ends up being pretty contested in this episode. And what we see in this episode is one of the ways in which the New Deal is itself, for all of its good intentions, the New Deal is itself racist.
Right.
And one of them is with the AAA, which we can talk about, and that's represented in the episode. Some other ways in which that's the case, if people are familiar with redlining, so through the Federal Housing Administration, I believe is what the acronym stands for. It's an organization that was meant to help people who had lost their homes to get new homes, but the organization is segregationist, and so it ensures that white people and black people end up in different neighborhoods from one another. So that's inherent in the New Deal. Some of the labor protections that are established during the New Deal don't apply to agricultural workers, don't apply to sharecroppers, and so that is inherently racist. And some of the other New Deal administrations, like the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was about hiring young men to do public works projects in like national parks and things like that, those programs were segregated. So in a number of different ways, the New Deal gave unequal aid to people of different groups. And the way that ends up working out with the AAA is this sort of fishiness around who gets the check. Is it the person who's working the land, or is it the person who's owning the land? Mm-hmm. Because if we remember when we were introduced to sharecropping, the way sharecropping works is technically, this white guy in the truck owns the land, and then the African American guy is essentially like being loaned out a parcel of land in exchange for a share of his profits, as well as paying whatever fees this white guy is going to place on the equipment and things like that. And so when the check comes in this episode, we see that the white landowner is like, I own the land, so it's my check. But the African-American farmer guy is like, but I'm farming it. This is supposed to help farmers.
It literally,
so it's my check.
They're telling me it goes to the person who worked the land.
Yeah.
Yeah. Decker and F.R. Lewis are fascinating, both portraits of like where 20th century racist practices are evolving, and also just like this sort of shifting power dynamics, because Decker like knows he's supposed to have rights. He's like, I know I'm supposed to have them, but because of like the life situation that he's in, where he's clearly coming from a lower income, he's not very educated. I think they say at one point that he doesn't even know how to read, and that's deliberate so that he can't learn things, as we've talked about before. We're kind of like seeing what people dealt with a generation or two ago on Roots is just still happening. It's just that it's happening in the country and it's happening on farms. It never went away. It's just in this corner. And so that's why I really like I was saying earlier, the fact that Simon Haley was like, no, this past generation, like they're still doing these awful practices, and I need to help with that. And I need to help the government like provide aid to these people, and tell these people that they deserve better. But it just doesn't, like, this guy doesn't have any, he has no leg to stand on.
Right. And on a personal level, I think it's really, you can understand why, if you want to play armchair psychologist for a second, you can understand why Simon Haley is committing his life to this kind of work, because he's the son of a sharecropper.
Right.
And he saw what the system did to his father and how it limited his father's life and prospects. And so in a way, Simon Haley, in this episode, he's trying to save men like his father and families like the one that he grew up in, from the system. So that to me was especially moving, having that context from previous episodes about him.
And the way that his sort of activism for the farmers works is he drives to all of the different farms and basically tells people, hey, I have all these proposals. I've sent you guys everything. I've mailed it all out. You've had time to look at it. Are you ready to sign some deals? Are you ready to be ready? Are you prepared for this check to come in and like know who it belongs to and who deserves it and how it's supposed to be spent? Can you realistically like either stop planting for a long time or change what you're planting? And
yeah, because what we find out is they're ruining the soil by not rotating their crops.
right, if they're just planting cotton, because as Lewis says, like cotton always works, it makes the most money. He's like, yeah, cool. In a couple of years, you're gonna have no land. You're gonna have dust.
Yeah. Because he's like, the white guys, the sheriff's like, who's going to buy these legumes or whatever? And it's like, guys, human beings have been rotating crops for like
thousands of years
at this point. This shouldn't be something that you fight so hard against.
And ultimately, it seems like they're fighting because they, you get old and you get comfortable in your ways and you don't want to change, I think. But also, like, so many people's lives are at risk because of that. And you'd rather die on this hill and sacrifice the lives of all your sharecroppers to, like, stick to your guns than, like, change anything that would support other people.
Right. And you have to wonder if also partly it's like we're stuck in our ways. Partly it's like this is what has made us money. But also partly the symbolism of cotton. And that being what's grown and that being the sort of clearest visual and institutional reminder that like we're holding on to the ways and the society of the old South by refusing to change the crops that we're planting. So in a way, it's also this sort of vector of white supremacy to say like, screw the dirt, screw the money. We need to keep planting cotton because that's the symbol of like this thing is the way that it's always been, and we're holding on to this institutional power.
This is the American institution that that our families have run on, and I think what's great too is Simon's like smart enough to realize that. He's talking to a man. I think this is when he talks to Petty John maybe for one of the first times, and they're like, oh, they don't have the right, or he's talking to one of the farmers who's like, they don't have the right to treat white folk like N-words. And he's like, listen, they don't have the right to treat any person like an N-word. And then he says that line referencing something you talked about last week, which is, you don't have to be black to be poor, son. Boll weevil don't see color. I think someone else says that to him. But like referencing the boll weevil and the idea that this was like a insect that was like devouring crops for a long time and like in destroying this plantation industry. Yeah. And again, regardless of race, color, or creed, or anything like that, it's just like, hey, poorness goes across boundaries.
Yeah, and we see, that actually maybe poverty doesn't go across boundaries all the time in the ways that it could to actually heal and help people. Right. Because what's the Petty John?
Yes.
Because we do have the moment Petty John goes through this arc in the episode where he's
Petty John, the shittiest ally.
right, where he meets Simon Haley at like a gas station, and the gas station owner won't let Alex Haley pee in the bathroom. He pretends that there isn't one, and then Petty John is like, "Dude, come on, it's a kid. What's the problem?
Come on,
just let him go pee." And then the guy's like, I'm not going to let him use the bathroom. And Petty John's like, not the bathroom. Let him pee in the bushes. Come on. We're white people. We get it.
Come on.
Okay, whatever. But then he has some respect for Simon Haley because of his agricultural knowledge. And
once again, they like him because he's smart. Sorry.
And because what we see is that Simon Haley's actually done something that Petty John has aspired to do, but like for whatever reason wasn't able to do, which is go to Cornell and study with this like specific dude. So to a certain extent, Petty John is like, this guy is like smarter than me. This guy has had more success than me. Which I think is maybe the first time that we've seen a white person do that.
Acknowledge that at least, yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I know like the guy in the military last episode was like, oh, these guys definitely have like more moral fiber than I do. And this guy has like harder, he's got more specific focus in his life than I do. But yeah,
right.
This is explicitly like this guy is higher up on the social and economic ladder than I am. That happens later too when the police and the farmer break into Simon's house and they're like, wait a minute. He has more money than all of us. That doesn't seem fair at all.
Right.
We'll get there.
Yeah. So what ends up, just the quick version of the story with Pettyjohn is he's going around with Simon at first to try to convince these guys to rotate their crops, but they're too ignorant and stubborn to do it. And then they're going around and telling farmers about the check from the AAA, and Pettyjohn's like, don't tell the black sharecroppers about that. And Simon Haley's like, you're telling the white people, it's your job. You're supposed to tell everyone. So they sort of clash over this. Then Pettyjohn ends up getting ambushed by other white people for like going around with Simon Haley. And then eventually he makes the choice. He shows up when the guy is holed up in the shack with his gun. Pettyjohn shows up, and like after all the white people are gone, then he's like, hey, Simon, by the way, I'm on your side, buddy. Let's hang out. And he ultimately has the realization of like us sons of sharecroppers from Tennessee have to stick together, which is kind of a cool moment because he finds like this other way, this different kind of solidarity, like solidarity through class origin, as opposed, and you know, at the expense of his racial solidarity with other white people. But he has to go on this huge journey and get beaten up by white people to realize that that's where his loyalties lie.
I was, by the way, trying to see, just briefly, sorry, if Pettyjohn, the actor who plays him, was somebody recognizable, because it feels like I thought he was the stunt cast of this episode.
He's got a sort of square-jawed, all-American look to him. That would make me think so.
Yes, he's played by Robert Culp, who was famous for a lot of different works in the 1970s, like Hickey and Boggs, where he played Boggs. Something called I Spy, which is like a show about a black guy and a white guy who are both spies, I think. And, it's Bill Cosby and Robert Culp together, so that's something. But most importantly, for everyone out there listening today, he's the bad guy in Half-Life. He's not the G-Man. He's Dr. Breen. So he's like the guy who runs Black Mesa in the Half-Life video games.
Okay. That's cool.
So he went on to do a lot of work. He died in 2010, so he's no longer working on that. But anyways, yeah, I thought that scene too, just to jump ahead a little bit, where he gets beat up. Weird that it's kind of filmed like a detective movie at like the height of the drama, where it's like, and now there's a fucking car chase and they're gonna beat him up, and it's like it's like too exciting for what it is, which is these people are racist and terrible. But yeah, he's the sort of the role of the ally in this episode, I guess. But he kind of waffles too much for me to really enjoy him and like respect him as a character, I guess.
Yeah. Definitely.
But I think that's ultimately the point. Is like, you're not gonna rely on somebody like that. And so they're talking about he meets F.R. Lewis. Simon does. And Lewis really, really hates Roosevelt and his damn wheelchair. He says something like, "Are they gonna wheel this guy up in his wheelchair through the White House and try and get me to change my plans?"
Bolshevik from New York, or whatever he calls it.
Bolshevik from New York. You gotta change your Twitter name.
Right. Yeah, I love that, like, that Bolshevik in a wheelchair, blah blah blah. And Simon Haley's like, yes, Mr. Roosevelt,
him, the next president. Put some respect on his damn name.
Yeah.
And he is excited about the check finally getting given out to all the people. But in the background of this story, we have Bertha George, who's like having more and more panic attacks and stressing out about her mother and how they haven't seen their family in a while. So they take some time away from work, even though they just heard about the AAA being passed, to go back to Henning, Tennessee to visit their grandmother. And that part was nice. It's kind of cool how these two episodes kind of always bounce back to the home in Henning, because it's like, if you have the fortune of like having a single place where like the family gathers every couple of months, every couple of years, it's really nice to just have that and then be like, okay, we're going to travel this month and we're going to visit the family. And like Henning still goes very, very far back, as we know in the story of Roots: The Next Generation. So it's just nice that they can still go there.
Definitely.
We get that really scary, sad conversation where Lewis is talking to Abe, the sharecropper, and he's like, basically using this like really fucked up logic to say, I know the money's supposed to go to you, and I know who told you that. Can you tell me who said it to you? And he's like, no, I'm not going to tell him. He chooses not to rat Simon out. And he's like, well, I need the check. I need the $128 or whatever as well. I can't pay you if I don't get the 128. How am I supposed to pay my family? What am I supposed to do without your check?
Mm-hmm.
Rightfully, though, Abe is like, well, you have money coming from other places. Me being successful is going to make you successful. Isn't this supposed to belong to me? But he's so afraid. Like, he's so ready.
Right.
He looks like an animal that's about to be attacked or something. Like, it's just so... You watch that, like...
Well, doesn't the guy pull a gun on him, or no?
I don't think he pulls a gun on him, but when I just mean, like, he's like a little... Just... He's so vulnerable here. And he's like,
Right.
you can take it. And he's basically saying, like, write my name on the check, void the check to yourself. He doesn't do it, but then the guy's like, all right, well, I'm going to keep it until you do, which is awful. And the sort of value of this check gets higher and higher as we start. Like, the stress of now everybody's coming after Simon's family, and Abe's family. So Betty John gets attacked by a bunch of people. The police break into Simon's house while he's still in Tennessee. This scene is really tough to watch. Obviously, yeah, everyone is, like I said, jealous that he lives well. They have the one farmer in there, and the cops are basically like, you can take whatever you want. Just take, if you feel like this is unfair, just take something. He's like, I don't steal. I work for a living. I I only take what belongs to me. And then one of the cops goes, he's got a bed with 2 sheets, Mr. Duffy, for under and on top. And they're like, what the fuck? That's no good. I don't even have that. I have a shed. And he snaps, and then they like break some stuff and destroy his whole living room, and it's terrible.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's kind of like bold that they're how much this series shows the police being corrupt. Do you think that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're doing a good job of being honest to that, and sort of continuing to talk about like the law and law enforcement as not being a thing that's fair, or in service of justice. Because there's also a line where Petty John says to Simon, "There's laws on the books, and then there's laws that folks live by."
Right. Yeah.
So it continues to be this theme throughout really the original Roots and Roots the Next Generations, that like the law is the place where white people enshrine white supremacy, and the police are the people who enforce that.
Right. And that hasn't necessarily changed as much as you would hope. So it's just, I guess it's more just striking to me that like even in 78 that they're like, yeah, it was the police that smashed up his house. There was like one farmer in there, but it was cops that did that. Let's just make that abundantly clear.
78 was pretty close to people watching on television during the civil rights movement as police officers cracked the skulls of black people peacefully marching for civil rights. Like it's something that's actually in the recent memory for people in the 70s as much as it's in our recent memory.
Maybe it's just more that the sort of propaganda of culture has, in my opinion, I've always thought of it as like media portrays police well because media is part of the industry.
Yeah, but I wonder when that started, because I don't know, like what are the things in the modern day that portray cops well? I think of like Law and Order or something, which doesn't really start until the 80s.
Yeah.
Like I think a lot of the kind of rhetoric around police and the phrase law and order is like a Nixon campaign phrase.
Propaganda.
Yeah, like that really maybe is starting around this point in the late 70s, but certainly hasn't gotten a stranglehold on the culture the way it is going to in like the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah. And you'll start to see that shift too, like as you continue to study through American history, in the culture through the 80s, like Family Ties having an African American cop as one of its leads, and like that being portrayed as like, no, but cops are fine because one of them is black. It's okay, you guys. Like he's a good cop. So the like history of propaganda is like it's wide spanning, but yeah, like you're saying, I think, and maybe in the 70s, because the news is just showing this stuff. It's kind of hard to counter that with like friendly movie portrayals or like nice TV shows about police because it's happening. We are seeing it in the news. It makes me think too, just to diverge for a little second longer on this, how because we're seeing this stuff in the news today as well, like police brutality rampant in the United States and everywhere. How propaganda is going to change, if it's going to be more prevalent, or if showrunners are going to realize that making a show right now about police that portrays them positively is not going to be a good look.
Mm-hmm.
I just wondered so much about that.
My timeline was a little off. I'm just looking at when Nixon gave that speech, and I think it was 1968. So this maybe is more contested time for cop stuff than I was saying, but I'm not sure. Anyway, sorry. Continue.
Yeah. No, just like how does that change in the next couple of years? Like, when do we stop seeing these like nice portrayals of police and at least start seeing really realistic portrayals? Whatever that ends up being, but that's a separate conversation. Yeah, I thought all of that stuff with the stuff police destroying his house was awful. Again, continuing the Bertha like side plot. I thought for a second that she was pregnant because someone mentioned her bleeding, but it seems like she actually has an illness. They never specify what her illness was.
Yeah,
that led to her death.
I'm sure it's probably something real that we could look up, but they just sort of are like, yeah, your mom's dying.
She's dying. She's bleeding a lot, and she's hallucinating, most importantly. But before we get to that conclusion, Petty John visits Simon's house, and they talk about all this stuff. And he mentions that he can't, like, Simon's like, I have to go help Abe out. Like, he is going to the police are going to come for him, and it seems like he's going to be killed. He's like, I can't really help you because society tells me I can't. Like, it goes again. I forget what exactly his line was, but he's basically like, it doesn't make sense for me to help you. Or something that's just very like, I don't know. I don't have anything for you. Sorry. Good luck.
Who says that again?
But what's his face? Petty John?
Oh, uh-huh.
And briefly we get Bertha telling Alex, like, you know, seeding the idea of him, like, everything that's important in your life you need to see through to the end. Your dad is not taking care of me because he has more important things to deal with, which is sad. Especially when you start thinking about how Alex Haley goes on to think about women and sort of his work over his love and his wife. But again,
also how he starts thinking about his father. Like, you can understand maybe some of the resentment that he has towards his dad starting right here.
Right, exactly. He's watching his dad like walk out, even though his like his wife is dying, and he's like, "Well, I have more capital M, more important work to do." But he goes, and then there's like this big shootout, and all of the police guys move in on Decker, and Simon comes in and tells him like, "Hey, you know, this is not a fight worth having."
To be fair to Simon Haley, he doesn't actually know about her illness at all.
No, I know. I'm not saying it's just that it's from Alex's perspective.
True.
It's like, my mom is sick, dad is walking out. Why is dad walking out when mom is sick?
That's true.
But yeah, ultimately, yes, Simon literally doesn't know. It's more like, why don't you tell him kind of thing. And it's complicated. I believe Abe just ends up going to jail. And Simon manages to secure the check. He gives it to him in jail. They share a big hug. He's like, all that really matters is that I got this check, and this will support this. So inflation's so weird. He's like, this $100 check will support my family for at least a year, if not more. And I'm like, fuck. Inflation's bananas. And then they go back to their house, and Bertha's hallucinating in front of Alex. She's talking about the scene from last episode where they go on the fire escape at the party, and she dies. So it's like, I believe Alex is about 11 years old at this point, and his mother dies. And his grandmother Cynthia shows him the tree in the shed once again, and reminds him to go on and keep the legacy alive. Yay. Yeah. Honestly, I thought this episode was really great. I thought it was really good, talking about the Great Depression stuff, really important, like you said, essential part of America of history. When I was briefly reading about the Depression, I didn't realize that it was a lot more wide-spanning than just the United States.
Yeah, it was a global phenomenon.
Yeah, I guess I just internalized that. Maybe that's just the Anglo-centric version of history.
I think it's not always in school. The line isn't always made super clear because you learn world history one year and then U.S. history the next year. But like, those photos of people in Germany with the wheelbarrows of cash going to the supermarket or whatever. Like, that's the Great Depression.
Right.
So it produces Nazi Germany at the same time that it's also producing like the democratic welfare state in the United States.
Right.
And like how different those two things are.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it's tragically it's just another one of those periods in American history that I feel like I know about, but I don't know about, and that is frustrating and a blind spot that I want to educate myself on more.
Well, do it.
But yeah, I will.
Great.
I'm still working through the civil rights movement, John. I'm working backwards from Roots, basically. I just was telling John before we recorded. I'm just now reading about Fred Hampton, guys. I'm getting there. I'm doing my work really slowly. But anyways, that's what we have for part 4 or part 5 rather. There's so many parts. We will be right back after this brief musical break to discuss Next Generation's part 6.
Welcome back to RootsChatz. The second episode we watched this week was Roots: The Next Generation's Part 6. The teleplay was by John McGreevy. It was directed by Lloyd Richards. It originally aired on February 23rd, 1979. Alan, what happened in Roots: The Next Generation's Part 6?
Well, Magellan, I'm very glad you asked. It is now 1939, and 17-year-old Alex Haley returns home to Elizabeth City from college. He's also there to tell his father that he's not on leave to conduct a research paper, but has in fact quit school. Simon has remarried since Bertha died, and Alex has some difficulty with that, all the more so when he realizes that his stepmother is pregnant. Simon has high hopes for his son and firmly believes in education as a way to improve your lot in life. Deciding to compromise, Simon decides he should join the army, but Alex instead agrees to join the U.S. Coast Guard. Like many other black folks in the segregated military, he finds himself relegated to the kitchen, serving as a steward, making beds, and shining shoes in silver. Out on liberty, Alex meets Nan Branch at a church dance. That's a great sentence. With the onset of World War II, they are married, but his father disapproves. They soon have a daughter, and with the war's end, Simon still holds out some hope that Alex will return to college. Alex decides he likes writing, but opts to re-enlist until he can decide on his future. He also realizes that little has changed when he's refused a room at a string of motels while moving to New York for his latest assignment. His new superior officer, Commander Robert Monroe, played by Andy Griffith, decides to help him out with his writing. He also suggests that Alex write about those things that stir his passions. So, Magellan, we're here.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the final generation of Roots.
Yep.
For now. Well, yeah, the story of Roots ends with the guy who wrote Roots. This is Alex Haley's story. How do you feel about it so far?
This is a dorky episode, huh? The first half is like it's kind of weird. I mean, there's some good stuff in here, but we definitely are moving away from no longer is it like, let's look at these historical moments, with some people along the way. Now it's like, this is the quirky life story of Alex Haley. And
yeah,
we were talking off mic that this is just not the part of his life that we're really that interested in. We're interested in the part where he's like writing Roots and finding his roots and stuff. In this part, it's like, okay, So you're sort of like a young fuck up a little bit.
Who sucks and is bad to his parents, and then gets married too soon, and then his wife hates him, and then she leaves him. Like, it just sucks. It sucks.
Yeah. But there's still some good drama and some important things to think about here for sure. So I think it's still a good episode. It's just the character of Alex Haley is kind of a dork.
Yeah, and remembering that the Alex Haley that we see for the majority of this, played by Damon Evans, is supposed to be like in his teens. He's definitely older than that. I think Evans was in like his 30s when he played
he's in
this.
his late 20s. I looked it up. He was like 28 or 29 or something.
And he's playing like a 17-year-old.
He's so clearly older than 17. It really threw me off. It was like he was doing a high pitch, like, "Hey, Dad, I'm 17, grr,"
hey.
kind of thing.
Name Alex Haley. Hey, that's me. I'm the guy. Okay, so here's the first thing. Talking about, like, to zoom out a little bit, this is the guy who goes on to write the book that forms the basis for this adaptation that we are watching.
Yeah.
And with that in mind, we know that this guy will grow up to have a sort of consciousness about his family and about history, American history, that the Alex Haley that we're seeing right now just doesn't seem to have. He like clearly knows, like when he's sitting on the porch in the last episode, and everyone is like, all the grandmothers are like, "What's the word for river again?" And he's like, "I remember the African word for river." Like he's retained the stuff that he was taught as a kid, but his lack of motivation in life, part of it is like awkward and uncomfortable to watch, but part of it is like that is how teenagers are.
Yeah.
Is this sort of like aimless, abandoned struggle for like meaning and purpose in a world that's like changing so rapidly around you. And I think that is really valuable to remind us that like not every member of this family or of any family legacy is sort of like born with a holy journey that they're ready to go on. But it takes decades of, and someone tells him this in the series, they're like, some people go entire lifetimes without realizing what they want to do. That's literally a conversation I've had with adults talking to me when I was struggling to find out what I wanted to do. So like, I totally get that. And I even understand the sort of like weird apathetic way that he plays Alex Haley here, where it's like he like knows when to turn up the passion and the drama, but in general his delivery is so flat and so apathetic that it feels like this guy is like half awake through so much of his performance. And on one hand, it's like, well, that's frustrating, even though that's like probably a little intentional. But then on the other hand, literally one generation ago, we got this beautiful love story about Simon and Bertha, like sitting on a log and reading poetry. And so is Alex Haley being like, okay, here's the whole story of my family and all their amazing work and incredible stuff. Me, whatever. Doesn't matter. I was shitty. No one liked me. I didn't have anything in life. I totally get that as a historian, to be like, my part of the story is not that important, you guys.
Well, yeah, because, I mean, especially this stuff at this point, it's not based on his book or anything that he's written necessarily. Maybe to a certain extent, there's some articles that he's written about this period of his life, which is what it seems to imply later when the guy's like, "Hey, write about that thing that happened to you." But the vast majority of this, at least from what I understand, is being gleaned from like interviews with Alex Haley or him like dictating memories from his life. So it is interesting to think about how that particular way of getting the information is affecting the way that people are characterized, because you can see, I think, at least what I'm getting from this is that later in his life, by this point, by the creation of Roots, Alex Haley has like a pretty deep respect for his father and what his father was trying to do.
Right.
So it's cool to see the Alex Haley on screen be like, "Fuck you, Dad," but know that the person telling this story is him. Yeah. And know that he's going to come around and be like, actually, my dad, maybe he went about it the wrong way, but he was right. And maybe I resented my stepmom when I was younger, but she was actually a really cool person who had some good things to say to my dad. So in a way, there is this kind of reconciliatory attitude that's happening just in knowing that the person who's creating the story, or at least
This
was
guy's gonna
telling
get
the
his shit figured
stories,
out.
yeah, is the guy who is being a butthead on screen. And I think that it's pretty compelling to see, you know, we've been following along the story of this family for generations, and we're now on the 7th generation since Kunta Kinte came to the United States, or was brought to the United States in chains from Africa. And the weight of those generations are starting to pile up, and so much pressure is being put on Alex Haley. So I think it's really valuable to see, you know, how is memory lost? How are these stories lost? And what is it like to be someone who has been told all these stories your whole life, has been told, like, this is the thing that you need to do. These are the people that you need to prove something to. This is the legacy you need to continue. What does it feel like to have all of that pressure put on you? And then, as he describes it, to get to school and be like, okay, I'm staring at these books and I just don't understand it. It's just not working for me.
Yeah, all this stuff doesn't add up to like me being equally talented in the same ways.
Yeah, and we get this really great scene when he comes home and he tells his dad, like, I'm dropping out of school, I got these grades, and his dad is like, hey, listen to me, your name is, and he says his full name, I can't remember all 4 of his names, it's Simon, or it's Alex something Palmer Haley.
Yeah,
I don't remember his...
He's Murray Palmer Haley.
Yeah, Murray Palmer Haley. And he goes through and he's like, okay, Alex was your grandfather's name. Murray is the family name from this part of the family. Haley is this part of the family. Palmer is your grandfather, Will Palmer. So he lays out, like, these are all the people that are in your name. And you have to wonder if Alex Haley is sitting there like, okay, but where am I in that name? Like, who am I? Because right now all you're telling me is that I have all these obligations to generations past in 4 different directions. But, like, where's what I want to do? Who am I in all of this? I don't want to be a professor. I don't want to write papers about agriculture or whatever. I don't know what I want to do, and I've never been given the chance to figure it out. So I have empathy for that, even though I think I definitely end up siding with Simon in this, where it's like, come on, dude. Go to school. Come on,
Just
man.
go to school.
Just go back to school. Don't get married so young. Come on.
Yeah, it's that, like, I think it's actually a really successful portrait of yourself to have the viewer be like, oh, because I'm seeing so much of myself in this kid.
Mm-hmm.
Not that, like, I didn't drop out of school and I am pursuing my master's, but, like, I find myself often too at the, like, behest of my parents who, like, want more for me that I can't rightfully define because it's being, like, defined for me.
Yeah.
And that confusion and that anxiety, especially even in, like, the 1940s when he's growing up, and it's like the world is changing so rapidly, and I think race relations are different, but they're not. Okay, I want something stable. Okay, fine, I'm gonna join and then his dad is like, what if you try joining the army? And he's like, yeah, but Dad, the Navy have really nice uniforms. It's like, okay, well, you just picked your life path for the next several years. Yeah. That's fine. And so I wanted to mention 2 things really briefly too. One is, if people listen to, we have patrons, we have a Patreon, and on our Patreon we had a podcast, a Chats Nights episode, where we were just chatting, and I think I brought up David Foster Wallace's This Is Water recently, and the whole thing about that commencement speech being that, like, you need to think about the world outside of your own perspective if you want to gain, like, a greater sense of empathy and perspective in general. And so when you think about Alex Haley's story in the context of him, his dad is overprotected. His dad is pushing too much pressure on him. His mom is not his biological mom. Everything sucks for him. But in the context of, like, he's the son of Simon Haley, who did all this amazing stuff and chose to remarry so that his children would have a mother, and who's, like, still able to live with and visit his grandparents regularly, who still remember the history of Africa. All of that stuff is, like, actually his life is amazing and he's living at an incredible time. Yeah. It's just that it's not centered on what is he doing with himself. And that can be really frustrating. The other connection was going to be that Alex Haley here, in a way, just to be a little crass, is kind of Aang from The Last Airbender.
Yeah.
Where
Yes,
he's like, what the
sure.
fuck do I do? Everyone else did everything before me. How am I supposed to fight things? I just want to be a kid.
Yeah, that's the yep. That's
That is the
accurate.
subtext of Avatar, but this is not a big take, but yeah.
Yeah, you make a good point about this matter of perspective, because I think having the perspective of generations all the way back to Kunta Kinte as we're telling this story gives us a certain outlook on Alex Haley. And I think, again, we have the understanding that like the Alex Haley telling the story now is the guy who did all the research and learned about everything else we just saw. And so now he's also recontextualizing his youth based on what you're saying about sort of the societal context of what his life was like. And, you know, it's one thing to sort of see this as a story of like, your family has a certain idea for what your life should be like, and you don't necessarily feel that way. But the added pressure of knowing that, you know, that's the story of a young African American man in the 1940s, and not even just one generation before his father. Like, all he really knows is his father is this guy who has like a really you know, great job where he wears super fancy suits all the time, and he's got beautiful glasses and like great gray hair. He looks very handsome, and he like has really made a life for himself and his family, and they live in this nice house, and that's what you know. But you don't see the generation right before your father, the generation of of the sharecropping family, and you don't see as a young person what slavery looked like, what sharecropping looked like. So there's a kind of lack of perspective there. And then there's also this idea that Simon is putting on his son of like, listen, you are part of the group of people who are going to like lead and save the race. Like, you're part of the talented 10th.
He tells him, yeah, you're the next part of the talented 10th. I thought that was you.
And Alex is like, don't put that on me. Like, don't tell me that I'm going to lead people when I can't even lead myself. It's like,
I can't even pass social studies.
Right. You're putting these huge things on my back. And I think that this, you know, we're imperfect people to be watching the show and speculating on this, but it must be something that African American people struggle with. This sort of feeling of like, I need to either be a sort of representative for my race in all these interactions that I have in my life, or B, my success in my life isn't just my own. It's also like, what can I do for the community that I come from? What can I do for my family? What can I give back? What can I do for other people who are like me? You know, all the ways that systemic oppression and white supremacy forced African American people to not just live a life for themselves, but also have all of these other pressures foisted upon them, in addition to living in a society where there are numerous barriers to that success in the first place. So there's a lot that's being put on Alex Haley right now in this moment, which, you know, I think makes him a really sympathetic figure, if also kind of annoying.
Even though he's very annoying. And before we go into the just like dunking on his whole time in the postcard, I also think that, yeah, this is a guy who will literally figure this exact thing out in his adult life.
Right.
So as somebody who's like not yet at the age where Haley decided to start writing Roots, it's kind of nice to be like, oh my God, yes, you are going to figure it out in your 30s. Like, that's really amazing to watch. But before he gets there, he decides to join the Coast Guard because they have cool uniforms. And he is his first day in the Coast Guard. He's in the kitchen, putting his fingers in all the cakes and eating sugar out of the thing. He fills his fucking mouth with sugar like a dingus. And then the head chef, Percival Scotty, is like, hey, what's going on? Where are you from? And he's like, blah, blah. And he like vomits sugar on the floor. And it just, what a mess, boy. Get your life together, man. Oh my God, I love it.
Yeah.
And Scotty's basically being like, hey, I'm going to try to help you out here and do the best you can. And maybe even though you seem very undisciplined. We're gonna get you into tip top shape. And he's talking to another crewman who's like, "Why did you join?" He's like, "I want to go on the adventures and save people on the ocean and do amazing stuff." And he's like, "Cool. You're not white. None of us are. We get to be the mess crew. They get to do that." And they just like pan over. It's really scary, but a little silly. I have to admit. They pan over to like the table full of white men, and like the one African American guy in the back who's just like standing up, holding food. He's like, "Oh no, racism is still happening here."
Yeah,
too.
well, they even say like you have to play house N-word to the white officers or something like that.
Yeah.
So it again, just as there are a lot of parallels between this episode and the previous episode, because just as Simon Haley is in the office at the university. Realizing like, okay, there are masters and servants to a certain extent in this world. Alex Haley's discovering the same thing about the military, this place where maybe he didn't enter it to sort of get the uniform and be like a respectable officer guy. But he's discovering that within the military, there are these dynamics of race that he didn't necessarily anticipate were going to be there.
Right.
And then the other moment of parallelism, because
we love parallels.
I don't want to lose it, is later when Alex Haley is like with his family trying to find a motel as they're going up to New York City, and nobody's going to let them stay anywhere because he's black. He ends up looking in a mirror at his uniform after he tries to get help at this veteran affairs office. And then he goes to the car with Nan, his wife. And he's like, I've heard of this happening before, but it's never happened to me. But I just looked in the mirror and I didn't see an officer. I didn't see a serviceman. I saw an N-word in a fancy monkey suit. And that parallels the moment when Simon Haley comes home with his family to see the house completely trashed. And Bertha's like, they've only broken stuff. It doesn't matter. We still have ourselves. And he's like, yeah, I know. But then he's like, but really think about it. Like, Simon Haley. Who's Simon Haley? Who am I? I'm this guy who's going to save everybody? No, I'm not. I'm just like a black guy in a 3-piece suit. So both son and father have this realization at separate moments in their lives of this thing that I put everything into, that I devoted a huge chunk of my life to, that I thought was going to mean something to somebody, can just be completely disregarded in an instant, as if I'm wearing a Halloween costume or something.
Right.
Yeah.
A cosplay or something. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And the significance of Alex's outfit also comes back a little later in the silliest scene of the episode, I think.
It's a tough.
It's a tough contest, yeah. But he goes to he takes Scotty actually with him to a nice church dance party, a wholesome church function hall. And Scotty's like, "Where's the booze?" And he's like, "It's a church party. They don't drink." He's like, "Where's the cute girls?" And he's like, "There's 2 of them. They're also younger, so you can leave if you want." He's like, "Okay, I'm gonna go to the brothel. Meet up later if you want." That's where Alex meets Nan Branch, and his flirtation here is so uncomfortably aggressive that it's like a red flag the second he meets her, where it's like, he's asking for her name. He's asking to dance. He asks her for a second dance, and then he asks to call her later. And it's like, dude, it's been 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And you made a really astute observation in your notes that the biggest reason, psychologically, I think that Alex Haley in this first marriage of his, we know later that he goes on to marry 2 more times. One of which I think was a secret marriage, but that's neither here nor there.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
That he really just he didn't have a mother figure for most of his life, so he wants affection and to have a stable family unit that he can then build and make for his children.
Yeah, because what ends up happening is he meets her this time, then they end up meeting 10 more times at different dances or something, and at the last one before he shoves off and sails to fight the war, or he doesn't even know that the war is happening yet, but before he leaves, maybe he does know, actually, I don't know. But anyway, before he leaves, he's like, come on, let's go somewhere. Let's be alone. And she's like, you keep asking me to do that. My parents are right there. I don't know where you expect us to be able to go. And he keeps pressuring her. And then she's like, okay, we can go like wash some cups in the back. And he's like, yes, great. We're going to have sex back there or whatever.
Oh my God, we're going to wash cups for sure.
And then he's like pawing he's groping her and like trying to smooch her face. And she's like, come on, chill out. And then he just impulsively is like, marry me. Let's get married. And the thing that he says is like, when she says yes, is like, I've been waiting to find someone to love my whole life. Like, it's not like, hey, I love you and here are the reasons I love you. I've
been looking for someone to check this box.
Yeah, like I've been wanting a companion for forever. Finally, I found one. And so you can see that like he really just wants somebody. It's not even necessarily about Nanny Branch. It's so fast and so sudden that the whole time you're like, what are your motivations here, dude? And do you really feel that strongly for this woman? And then he just kind of doesn't prioritize her in their marriage. And it really does feel like he's filling a void to a certain extent.
A void that you expect. Well, you just know this marriage isn't going to go well. So then as it finally starts to crumble by the second half, you're like, yeah, of course, this started badly. Like they started on the worst possible foot. How is this ever going to work out? But before like all that stuff starts to blow up, we get my like weirdest scene of the episode vote, which is he meets up with Scotty at the brothel later the first evening, and they're like, all right, we're gonna set you up with a girl. And it's like, I love the film Almost Famous, but one of my least favorite scenes in that movie is when the main character William is like beset upon by a bunch of groupies, I guess to use the term, who like take his virginity without his permission. And it's supposed to be very funny that like the young guy is being, I don't even want to say raped, but like there's a bunch of women having sex with him, and the consent there is very dubious. And this is kind of a similar thing where it's like, all right, someone take him to bed, let's go, ladies. And a woman named Daisy takes him and like looks at him, and she's like, take your hat off and take your shoes off, and he like hands her his shoes. And she's like, you don't know how to do this, they always give me the young ones. And then she's like, take your 13 buttons off your stupid outfit. And he's like, the 13 buttons represent the 13 Confederate States. And then she does this like corny play where she's like, yeah, this one's, Massachusetts and Connecticut, and we're going to go all the way down to Rhode Island. And then we cut away.
You almost expect him to go like, hey, that's the small one.
This, I only imagine he put a scene in like this because it actually happened and he wanted it to like bring some levity.
Yeah, definitely.
But like, why?
Right, it's like, what do we learn about Alex Haley from this scene exactly? I'm not...
Maybe like he has a weird relationship to sex and like romance now. We already know that.
Yeah, and I think it also speaks to the detachment that he has with Nanny Branch, because like moments after he meets her for the first time, he goes to this brothel because he like doesn't get from her what he wants, I guess you could say.
Yeah, totally.
So I think that adds to... I think the scene does a lot to add to our sense of unease and like skepticism about their relationship, to be like, okay, but do you really feel that strongly about her when you like went to the brothel moments after meeting her? Yeah.
And it equally sucks too that once he goes to the South Pacific as World War II begins, like their relationship has been, a lot of it has been through communication via letters. And the guy writes really well. So like Nan Branch presumably like loves the man in the letters a lot. There's a scene where the Navy soldiers are being handed mail, and he gets 33 letters, not all of which are from Nan Branch, but are like, this is the kind of moment where you go, and that's how I knew I wanted to be a writer, because he writes to Nan, he writes to his dad, he writes to teachers who failed him. He's like, I just like writing. I like to see what people respond to me with. So the guy clearly has like the ability to be romantic and kind and like knows the words for it. It's just like not with this woman, and it's not the priority in his life. But
yeah,
like, I don't
and
know.
Also like the fact that he ends up I think the dorkiest thing in this episode is that he ends up starting this like little business where he's writing love letters. He's like what's the word? The ghostwriter for all these sailors and their love letters. And he's like reading them out loud to them. And they're like, wow, that's the best one yet.
They gave him $1, which by the way translates to about $16 today for each letter. That's a pretty good deal.
And that just goes to show, like, maybe he's writing these lovely things to Nan and he's got a way with words, but he can just flip that on, you know, with Joe Sixpack's girlfriend and say these like beautiful, beautiful things.
Yeah, Joe Sixpack hands him a thing that's like, what's your girl's profile? All right, Martha has an ass that won't quit, green eyes, brown hair. All right, I got it.
Perfect.
Like, what?
Yeah. It does. It's not a very flattering portrait of Alex Haley that we get in the first half, or really in this whole episode.
Mm-mm. Nope. Because it's just like, yeah, like you said, he can just write these words about anyone. It doesn't mean anything to him. He just likes the act of writing.
Yeah.
Simon is reading about Hiroshima back home, and which is like, at least they're acknowledging that part of history. The war is quote unquote over, as people understood. I guess they spend a surprisingly little amount of time on this one in talking about World War II, but I never thought of like the bombing of Hiroshima as the definitive end. I mean, it's not, right? Like how I need to kind of paint a timeline in my head here of like the time when Hiroshima happened versus when the peace treaty was signed.
It's, I think, a pretty decisive near the end point. I mean, by the time that happens, the war in Europe is over. Germany has surrendered. Italy has surrendered, all that. And this is a pretty decisive blow. The war is kind of winding down, I think, prior to this point. I don't know the exact dates of when.
I got some dates for you. So, but the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened between August 6th and August 9th of 1945. World War II is declared over, the global war ending September 2nd of the same year.
Yeah.
So, like, like a month later,
right.
Pretty much.
And Simon Haley, when he's reading the newspaper, he parrots this opinion about that bombing that teachers still in some classrooms posit as like a legitimate justification, which is dropping the nuclear bomb actually saved lives because it kept us from doing more fights that would have killed more American soldiers. And that was definitely presented in my high school U.S. history class as like, was the bombing justified? So whenever I teach it in my class, I'm like, some teachers might ask their students if like dropping this bomb was justified. That's bullshit. There is no justification for this horrendous act. And it's like one of the few times where I'm like, and I won't entertain like counter arguments to that.
Well, yeah, as soon as you start talking about wars in the context of like numbers like that, and you start treating people like kind of tallies, you are like pro-war basically. Being like, well, if it leads to less people dying overall, then it was worth it.
Right, and also inherent in the argument is this assumption that like the lives of Americans are more valuable than the Japanese civilians who are killed and in some cases like irradiated for life because of this bomb.
Right. Awful stuff. Yeah. And I appreciate you mentioning that. But yeah, the episode like really doesn't touch on World War II, which I was a little disappointed about, but at the same time, so much media talks about World War II.
But it was a sort of weird like yeah, World War II is this little vacation I went on where my my commanding officer fell in love with a New Zealand sex worker, and I wrote a bunch of funny letters, and then I came home. The tone is so strange.
And now I want to be a writer. Yeah. Something we can both relate to, obviously, with like budding careers in writing. Alex really wishes that he could that could be his job, but in his time and in our time, you can't exactly make a living being a writer. He fights with his dad by the water. Like, it's a really beautiful scene where he's like saluting all these different Coast Guard people, and his dad is saying like, I asked your commanding officer What does he ask? I forget what he's like. You don't have the right to ask my commanding officer this
Oh,
thing.
Simon has this whole plan, because basically, what his wife tries to, I think his new wife's name is Ziana or something like that.
Yeah.
Ziana is like, just let's welcome him home and let's not put anything on him. And Simon's like, okay, sure. But also I have like a 5-year plan totally laid out and ready for him that I'm going to implement as soon as he gets back. And so he's taught, yeah. And this is the moment where it's like, Dad, come on, chill out.
Let me live my life. I don't even want to go back to school.
But he's like, okay, Alex, I've got this plan. The GI Bill was just passed, which if people don't know is essentially a law that provided a number of different supports to veterans who were coming back into society following the war, and one of those supports was the federal government paying for these veterans to go to college. Yeah, right. So that's pretty significant. Also, if you think about it, a huge contributor to education gaps and wage gaps between men and women, because predominantly the beneficiaries of the GI Bill are the men who served in the war. Yep. And so that's an effect that it has, is it educates all of these men, and then I think is a big contributing factor to the like intense domesticization of the 1950s as a result. Mm-hmm. But anyway.
These guys all got to go to the war, come back, be educated, and make all the money.
Right.
And the women who stayed home are like, why wouldn't you continue raising the family? Because they didn't have a chance.
Yeah.
I actually know one of my good friends from my time in my post-baccalaureate was in school entirely because of the GI Bill.
Oh, because it's...
Or not the GI Bill.
Still around today, you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. Of like, he served in the military for a couple of years and was then able to go to college on that. Mm-hmm. So...
but yeah, so Simon is like, here's the plan. You're going to do your bachelor's in a year, then your master's and your PhD. And Alex Haley's like, Dad, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go to New York City and be a writer. And you shouldn't have. And Simon Haley talked to his commanding officer to say like, I'll get him discharged early. So that's when he's like, no, how dare you? You can't do that.
And he ends up working in the PR department of the Coast Guard, which is hysterical. That's like a fucking office. Yeah. And he's trying to get a story published. The rest of this episode goes by really quickly. It's like very predictable, like man works too hard and his life falls apart kind of thing. Yeah. But he's not finding success in his work. One of the people he tries pitching a story to reads his story and then is like, I think your story is fine, but you know, ambitious black men give me stomach cramps. I'm sorry, but blame my Southern heritage for that one.
That's awful.
Come on.
That's so
the
bad.
Way that people are... Because now we're approaching Mad Men racism. Where it's like, if we pretend you guys don't exist, it's fine. But when you're in our office, like, go away. Mm-hmm. It sucks. Oh, everyone is so horrible to him. But he works hard. He burns the midnight oil. And... You know, I really don't like it when there's stories like this that turn out that like the dad was like right in dumping all of his time and energy into his work, because then it like sets a bad precedent for fathers in the future to keep doing this like unhealthy work practice. But I understand that the capitalism means that somebody needs to like throw their body on the gear a little bit, on the wheels. So on one hand, I'm frustrated with like the fathers, and on the other hand, I'm more frustrated with the system when I see stories like this. But this doesn't end well for him.
It's also frustrating because it makes out his wife to be like, come on, you don't get it. This is Alex Haley. Like, he's going to become Alex Haley. And her grievances are legitimate. You know, he's ignoring his family. He misses Christmas. He
fucking misses.
Yeah, he's not being a good husband or a good father.
Yeah, when you think of the story as like, as long as he keeps doing this work, he goes on to make the book Roots. That part sucks, because then you're like, no, like, Nan, stop telling him he's wrong. He's gonna make the book, but yeah, he should just be a good dad.
Right. So it's kind of frustrating when this plot shows up in a biopic of like someone that you know is gonna be a quote great man or whatever, because you're like, Nan has a point though. You know, can't you balance work and family in some way? Can't you do both? Can't you figure it out? Can't you be a little more loving? Can't you remember Christmas? You know? So
yeah, it's very frustrating. And he returns to Henning to bring his kids to see the family. And he goes into the shed and once again has a conversation with Grandma Cynthia about the tree. And she's like, don't you remember we literally had this conversation last episode? And she's like, yeah, I do remember it. And she's getting old and he's sad that she's going to die. And he's sad that everybody on this tree has died and that it's kind of like an endless cycle. But
well,
at the end of the day,
this really sad thing is he goes to the garage to look for the tree trunk and it's not there because it got
all the like paper is on the floor.
It got termites, so they had to get rid of it.
Right. Yeah. Very sad. Yeah. I wish that someone had some sort of preservation technique at the time because it would be really amazing to have that for like a family. This like thing that everybody adds to. Because I know like some generations do like a quilt sort of thing. Where every generation makes a block on the quilt. But yeah, that was a big bummer of a scene. And more bummers. All of his story pitches get rejected. He rips up all the mail in front of his kids, his 2 kids now, and in front of his wife. And he's like, I'm a failure. I'm a terrible writer. I'm garbage. He goes to a bar. He sees his commander, Andy Griffith, is here, who's like, wow, why are you really going to give up being a writer? That sucks. Why don't you write about yourself? He's like, myself? He's like, yeah, as in like your time in the Navy, your family, where you come from. Don't people think that's interesting? In starting to write that and starting to conceive of that, he's working hard at and totally forgets fucking Christmas with the family. He doesn't put the tree up. He doesn't get his kid the fire truck. Sucks. Nan is furious. He finally comes back home, like, I think it's implied like at least a day or 2 later, and pulls up, and then the kids are leaving, and Nan is leaving, and he's like, where are you going? And she's like, I'm done. So they're divorced. This is the end of Alex Haley's first marriage.
Yeah.
Weird to end an episode of Roots TNGs on such a downer note.
Also, in real life, this isn't when his marriage ends.
Really?
The marriage ends in 1964, according to the internet. So,
whoa.
I don't know. I don't think it's 1964 already. So maybe they just legally stay married, but they're separated or something.
Oh, maybe.
Like
this is, or maybe this is we don't know because we haven't seen the last episode. Yeah. When he meets his second wife. But with the preview, yeah, like we were saying before, the previews of the next one seem exciting.
Yeah.
I'm just excited for Alex Haley to get his life together. Honestly.
Yeah, I'm excited for James Earl Jones.
One of his early roles. Honestly. That's cool. But yeah, let's discuss that. What are we watching next week for RootsChatz, Magellan?
Well, next time we're watching the final part 7 of Roots: The Next Generations. Alex Haley, played by James Earl Jones, is now a successful magazine writer. His latest assignment, an interview with Malcolm X. Yeah.
Yes.
So there's other Roots-related stuff, but this is kind of where we're going to end our old-timey Roots coverage. There's like a Christmas movie with LeVar Burton or something, but we don't really want to watch that. And then there's another mini series from the 90s called Alex Haley's Queen. It's got Halle Berry in it as his grandma, which we're also not going to watch because I think we've gotten we've gotten a lot from Roots, and I think we're ready to move through it and move past it at this point.
Yeah, and also just like following the family tree has been the most interesting part. So then to rewind back and be like, one more adventure with Kunta Kinte and Fiddler. It's like, part of me, like, as a fan of the characters wants that, but I don't necessarily think that's going to make for, like,
it also seems like it's in weird taste because the movie came out in 1988. So it's sort of like, hey, remember when Roots made us a bunch of money? Like, let's do that again.
Right. Nostalgic and also the whole, like, everyone talks about the first 2 episodes of Roots.
I don't know. I might end up watching it just out of curiosity, but we're not going to officially discuss it on the show. But yeah, so we'll end with part 7 of The Next Generations. And then the week after that, we're going to watch the 2016 remake of Roots. So that's going to be a chunky discussion. And then we're done with Roots.
A heckin' chonker.
Yeah.
Wow. Very exciting. You want to take it to the plug down, Mr. Magellan?
I would love to. So if you want to get in touch with the show, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can find us on email, chatzpod@gmail.com, or on Twitter, twitter.com/chatzpod or @chatzpod or however you Twitter things. You can also join our listeners discussing previous episodes. Right now they're doing a listen through a Throw Chats Thursday of Scape Chats, our very first season, over at reddit.com/r/chatspod. All of those are spelled CHATZPOD, of course. If you would like to help other people to find the show, you can always suggest it to people. That's fun. You can look back at our old seasons. Maybe we did a season on your friend's favorite show. Maybe you have a friend who loves Freaks and Geeks or loves the Newsroom. Maybe don't point them to our Newsroom season if they love the Newsroom.
Yeah, I know.
But, you can do it that way. You can also help people to find the show by leaving a review on iTunes or wherever you find the podcast. Those 5-star reviews help us to move up in the algorithm and help people to find the show. You can also support the show directly over at patreon.com/chatspod at $1, $3, or $5 a month. $1 a month gets you access to a couple old commentary tracks, as well as currently my solo watch through of the X-Files called the Chats Files. At $3, you get access to all of our new Patreon content, 3 things a month coming at you. And then at $5 a month, you get that, plus everything in the backlog, plus our undying gratitude for supporting us at that level. We really appreciate it. And as we've been saying throughout this run of Roots Chats, if you believe that your money is better spent supporting causes that aid in the fight towards racial justice and racial equity, please, by all means, point your money in that direction. Let us know that you're doing that. And then we will just shoot you a link to find our Patreon stuff without money changing hands between the two of us, because we believe in those causes and we want to encourage people to support them.
Indeedly do.
Yeah. So we always end our episodes by giving a little recommendation of something that you can do between now and next time if you want to entertain yourself or think or whatever the case may be. So, Alan, what's your chatsum? What are we snacking on between now and next time?
Well, I feel like my last couple of chatsums have been, very enjoyable and personally entertaining to me. I wanted to focus my chatsum this week on something more relevant to what we've been talking about. And a novel that I've been yet another novel in my endless pile of, I'll get to it at some point, is Octavia E. Butler's Kindred, which is a novel from 1979, it's actually infamously hard to pin down genre-wise because it mixes historical novel with sci-fi, with fantasy, all at the same time. It is a time travel story about a woman, I believe in the 1970s, who finds herself teleporting back and forth to the era of slavery. Are you familiar with Kindred?
I'm vaguely familiar, but I didn't realize there was so much time travel involved.
Yeah, it's exactly. So I'm not sure if that new movie that's coming out, the one with Janelle Monáe that we keep seeing trailers for, is related to Kindred, but it's
Antebellum.
If that's similar, but Kindred is actually taught in a lot of high schools nowadays, thankfully, from what I've heard, because it's one of the most realistic portrayals of the slavery era in fiction, and the sci-fi hook is really fascinating. The idea of connecting to your legacy. I really like the little bits of the main text that I've read, but I never purchased the novel. And recently, what I discovered is that there's a really good graphic novel adaptation of Kindred that came out just a couple of years ago that kind of takes the text of it and does it in a graphic novel format. And 2020, I've been reading a good amount of books, but I've been reading even more comics. So I think I'm just going to read the graphic novel version of Kindred. It checks off all the boxes of what I've been looking for and also seems really powerful and enlightening. So recommending it for myself to finish it and recommending it for the listener to check it out. That's Kindred by Octavia Butler.
And that Antebellum movie is coming out on the 21st. So.
Oh, Shaz.
So we might, I might check that out and chat some down the road. Who knows? Cool. Well, I've got a chatsum that also is kind of related to Roots in a way, but in a slightly different way. I don't know. You chatsummed a little while ago, finding your roots or thinking about your roots or something.
Yeah.
I'm going to specifically chatsum. This week I bit the bullet and I decided to do a trial of Ancestry.com. And I've been really enjoying that process. And I've found like a lot of relatives on there. I have to go do another pass to make sure that I didn't actually accidentally say that someone was like married to their daughter or like whatever, oh, this person is actually two different people and I messed it up, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, it's just cool to sort of find people and see where people come from and sort of learn that like I have a lot of relatives from different sides of my family who spent a lot of time in upstate New York, interestingly. And then I like traced back a couple lines to France and to Germany. And the main thing that I'm learning is like I'm several generations deep of like white American people.
Whoa.
Yeah, but it's I don't know, it's cool. And also another kind of fun thing is that they have a lot of like high school yearbooks in databases on there. So I like found yearbook pictures of like my dad and my mom and my grandma and stuff because they're just there. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think, I don't know how much like with the data that they use, how cool Ancestry is, but as a service, from the little bit I've used of it, it seems really great. And the fact that you were able to find like not only information, but photos and sort of able to compare yourself to your past generations is wonderful. That's the ultimate goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was disappointed to find that there was less sort of records in there of my family, because a lot of it is like a little U.S. centric. I just think that's where they have the most, like, largest quantity of data.
Mm-hmm.
They have different plans, and there's one that's like, I ended up like looking at the trial of the higher up plans, the ones that include
Like
the international
records,
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was able to find a little bit of stuff. I need to dig into it more myself and plug in more data before it'll give me more, but I think I could find something in here if I looked a little bit
Yeah,
harder.
the one thing I guess I want more of is just the nature of these records is such that like most of the records you're going to find are like marriage records or like birth certificates, or in some cases, like for me, I was finding like baptism dates and stuff.
Yeah. And it's like, cool, I know when my grandfather was baptized.
Yeah, so like I know like, oh, this great grandfather, I know that he was a Lutheran, and I know that he was born in like 17 whatever and died and married this lady, and I know literally nothing else about him. But it's sort of funny. I think it's got me thinking about like the privilege, the way that privilege is enshrined in historical records, because I like was digging through generations and generations of like people that I think this is them, I don't know anything about them, and then all of a sudden I got to the point where there was like a great grandfather who was like a minister, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, super clarity about exactly the names of all of his kids and wife and exactly where he lived, and all of a sudden like a super detailed account of this dude's life, because it's like this guy was important because he was a reverend.
I see.
And it just got me thinking about like, that's kind of fucked up that all of these other people, I know like very little about them, but now 7 generations back,
minister.
It's like, oh, this guy.
Yeah, that's often the thing with looking at family trees, is like you can go as far back until you find somebody historically, what history considers significant, and then suddenly you have way more info, and that just, I'm sure that happens for a ton of people, but yeah, it's weird.
It's also got me thinking about like, what is it that brings Alex Haley to Kunta Kinte specifically? Because if you think about 7 generations, you're talking about like, the family tree is expanding as you go back, doubling every generation.
Yeah.
So, he's choosing out of his great grandparents like dozens of people. So it's like, how, what path do you follow? And I guess it's because that's, what's passed down through oral tradition through his family. But
there's
there's just
a single It's a really brief moment I caught in the preview for episode 7 that I'm so excited to talk about, where he figures that out. And it's just so beautiful. And I was like, oh, man.
Yeah.
That must have been one of the greatest moments of his life.
Yeah.
Because we are now coming into it years later where he's like, yeah, I already knew that. But literally the moment where he was like, Kunta Kinte is the guy's name. Holy shit. Like, that's a lot of info. But yeah, that's really cool that you were able to find that stuff. I'm glad you dug into that.
Yeah.
And that, dear listener, is going to do it for this episode of RootsChatz. Thank you, as always, to Magellan for being the rock to my hard place. And thank you for listening to this episode of RootsChatz. Peace.